Hello and welcome to Chaplain's Word of the Day. God's Word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I'm Chaplain Otis Corbett, and I invite you to explore a portion of the Bible with me today. Today I want to share a word about the political prodigal as I comment on Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 through 24. Let's begin by reading verses 1 through 3. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Today, as we continue in a series of devotionals about the prodigals of the Bible, we're introduced to the political prodigal, a Jewish servant of King Darius of Babylon. His name was Daniel. Now, black sheep are often unfairly accused of being troublemakers or rebellious. Now, I can think of no actual data that says a sheep with black wool is more troublesome than a sheep with white wool, but they've just gained that reputation. No one wants to be called a black sheep. Just like black sheep have an undeserved bad reputation, some people are made out to be prodigals when they really aren't. And this is the story we're going to look at today in the life of Daniel. You see, politics is about power, not performance. And politics is about influence, not integrity. And we'll find that Daniel was very powerful, but he also was very integrous. And that set him up to be a target. And also, when a person has a vital, effectual religious faith, it's not uncommon to find such a person becoming a lightning rod of criticism and persecution by society. And this is exactly what happened to Daniel, our political prodigal. Now, in verses 1 through 3, we see that Daniel had excelled. In truth, God's people ought to excel. God is the very best there is, and we should try to honor that greatness by being as good as we can be also. One of the greatest recruiting slogans of the United States Army was to be all that you can be. And that's true about God's people. We should try to be all that we can be. God's people should not just try to meet the standard or squeak by or get by the skin of our teeth. We really should try to exceed the standard, not to earn our salvation, but to bring the greatest glory and honor to our Lord. Daniel is a prime example of this. Even though he was in exile, he'd become part of a pagan government just like Joseph had back when Joseph was in Egypt. He had showed that ability along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he was best by test. He was given the opportunity to actually compete in a test with the other workers of the king, and he and the 3 other Jewish boys were found to be folks who excelled. He was best by test, and he had become a chief advisor and friend to King Darius. Now, why did Daniel excel? Well, the simple answer is that he did it God's way. We need to remember that God's commands are not punitive, but they're actually designed for our blessing and to give us the very best and most abundant life possible on earth. In Matthew 11:33, Jesus told us that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. When we do things God's way, we find they turn out for the best. Now, sadly, as I commented above, society often looks on the successes of God's people with jealousy. And this is exactly what happened in the life of Daniel as we read verses 4 through 9. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So the governors and satraps thronged before the king and said to him, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. We see that Daniel's performance caused him to stand out from the rest of the crowd, and we also see his integrity caused him to stand out from the rest of the crowd. You know, the fact of the matter is, someone who excels, whether it be in performance or integrity or some other area, they attract attention. A highly performant person's name gets mentioned. A highly integrous person's name gets mentioned. Their opinion gets asked, and people listen to that opinion. The problem when you stand out amongst the rest of the crowd is that it can be a cause of jealousy from them. And as we see here, the governors and satraps wanted Daniel's power and influence, but they didn't want to equal his performance or his integrity. As one music instructor told me ruefully, "I've heard a lot of people say that they would do anything to play the guitar well. Sadly, they will do anything but practice." When people get jealous of others, they will search for anything possible to discredit them. If they can't attack them for their performance, then they attack them for their integrity. And if they can't attack them for their integrity, they must attack them with something else. And in this case, we see, like often happens, Daniel being attacked for his faith. We see that in the New Testament as Jesus dealt with the Pharisees. Those who are jealous will manipulate those who work with someone to undermine them and to trap them. And that's exactly what happened in the case of Daniel. Remember, these governors and satraps could not find fault with David's work, nor could they find fault with David's character. So what could they do? They attacked his faith. And in response to this attack, Daniel had to make a choice. He had to choose. And we'll see this in verses 10 through 17. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petitions 3 times a day." And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored until the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Now, O king, it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. When Daniel was cast in the role of political prodigal, he had to choose. Would he follow God? Would he become a secret saint? Would he just wait out the king's decree? Or would he sell out and totally deny God? Well, the scriptures are plain. They tell us that Daniel chose God. He chose God over his reputation and over his employment. He chose God over his career and his personal safety. He was willing to suffer for his faith. Daniel didn't flee. He didn't try to convince the king to do something that the king could not do. He didn't try to wait out this silly law and not pray for 30 days. Instead, he did not turn his back on God, but went into the lion's den with full faith. It's always interesting to me how the plans of evil ones always turn out in the Bible to be the plans of God in disguise. They planned to either discredit Daniel or to eliminate him, but instead they just gave him an opportunity to excel in his faith. But even more than that, they gave Daniel's God an opportunity to excel, and of course, God always exceeds our expectations. We can read what happened next in verses 18 through 24. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him, and also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early on the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them and their children and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. We've been talking about prodigals. And of course, we began with the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15. But that is only the third of three similar stories in that chapter. In Luke 15, Jesus started talking about a lost sheep, and then he went on to talk about a lost coin before talking about a lost son. The thing is, these stories really should not focus on what was lost, but the one who found them. The story of the lost sheep should really be considered the story of the faithful shepherd. The story of the lost coin should really be the story of the woman who searched for it. And the story of the lost son really should be reframed as the story of the loving father. And the same is true of the political prodigal that we see today. When God has an opportunity to reveal himself in our lives, he always does so in a positive way. Sometimes it's a still small voice, and sometimes it's preserving someone while they're in a lion's den. God is sovereign. Man proposes, but God disposes. God determines who the genuine prodigals are, and the genuine prodigals here were the ones that were eaten by the lions in this story. We need to fully absorb the dimensions of Daniel's faith. Darius spent a night in fear and trembling. He didn't have any entertainment. He was scared to death, and he couldn't even sleep. But the next morning, Daniel was cheery and replied to his call of, "Daniel, are you there?" with, "O king, live forever." Daniel knew his God and he trusted him. And the message for us today is that we need to do it God's way and God's timing. We need to be people of performance, not for salvation, but to honor God. We need to be people of integrity, not for our salvation, but to honor God. And when we are attacked for our faith, when we are made black sheeps in our society or in our place of business or school, when we become the political prodigal, we need to be even more faithful to God. If we do it God's way and we trust God in faith, He will bless us. He always does. And the story of the political prodigal from the book of Daniel is a great illustration and testimony to that fact. Thanks for visiting with me today. I'll be back soon with another word from the Bible we can share together. Every blessing. I'm Dr. Otis Corbett.